The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
It is now 11 o'clock and time to get started with our best practice series, Understanding the DNi Assessment. And before we get started, and before I pass it over to Kent, I'd like to cover some housekeeping items. First of all, this session is being recorded. Everybody is starting off muted. There will be time for questions, and Kent will be asking people if they have any questions during different parts of the webinar. And when you do, you have two choices. One, you can click on the hand and raise the hand, and I'll call on you, or you can send me a message, a question, and I will again call on you, and you could ask Kent your question. So make sure you raise your hand and send questions. And I believe that's about all we need to cover as far as the webinar is concerned. So in order for us to get started, I am going to be turning this over to Kent.
Thanks everybody for your patience. And today we're here to talk about the developmental needs inventory and where we're at in this project, which I've been intimately involved in improving, modernizing the technology and shifting it over to our platform. Sam, if you go to the next slide. So here's the summary of what we sent out before on the DNi, and we want to help you today to see, one, how to use this in your programs by helping your participants generate an awareness of need or really realize their own needs better through objective feedback. The other is to focus your facilitation better by using a tool that allows you to gain a deeper understanding of your participants. And then lastly, I think to sell more programs by helping decision makers see the value of your programs, again, in a more objective manner where they can actually see the need and I think in some ways even see the benefits through some specific things we'll talk about shortly here. Next slide. So I won't go through this. In looking at the list of attendees, I see a lot of old friends on the list. Many of you know, I've been an LMI partner for quite a long time, and I also am involved in a separate company that we formed that focuses on assessment publishing, and we've helped with the Teleo and the DNi. And this is just to give you an idea of my credentials. This is an area in IO psychology of publishing, maintaining tools like this that I have some educational credentials on. Next. And the agenda for the call today is I wanted to give you an overview of the DNi. Let's talk through it and then talk about how to use the DNi in an LMI program and in your practice, and then sort of lift the curtain and show you a little bit of behind the scenes what goes on with the DNi to give you a better idea of how this all works and what your role is in using it. And then hopefully leave plenty of time for Q&A. Next. So as we said before, what you'll take out of this, but some of the benefits of the DNi is being able to target strengths and weaknesses, to understand for your participants exactly what their needs are. And in a lot of ways, we live in a data-driven world. You know, there's a lot of evidence about millennials being more data-driven. They're used to it because sort of that Fitbit culture. So they're used to gathering data and seeing data. So the DNi fits into that sort of cultural shift with younger leaders we're working with, and I think really any leaders. I think it also helps leaders plan better. You know, we always fight that time crunch with leaders. Where do they find time to do the development that we all know they need to do in making that case? I think this provides you with another tool to help them focus their goal setting, focus their efforts on areas of specific need through this sort of feedback. And I think this idea that they can begin to understand better leadership practices and align with what they're trying to achieve with the kind of behaviors they exhibit and whether or not they're helping them get there or not. I think also in these last two is really start to call attention to the cultural aspects of a company, because an organization's culture really starts with their leaders. So by providing measurement, even broader measurement of key leaders in the organization, it begins to help you do a better job of guiding them to the sort of underlying cultural change they want to create. That helps them with talent, attracting good talent, keeping good talent, all those things that are so important to companies today. And I think lastly, leaders that aren't effective are stressed. And as this last bullet points out, that leaders who can improve and make progress in this often, it can lower stress and make them feel better about the job they're being asked to do, and often asked to do without any kind of training and all those things that we talk about. So we know that. So these are some of the benefits of incorporating the DNI into what you're doing. Next slide. So how can you use the DNI? Just a couple of thoughts about how you might use it. One is, like Nancy has done, you fully integrate the DNI into LMI programs where you're using it as a key initial component in the overall setup for, an ELD or other LMI programs. I think you can also use it as an organizational diagnostic, sort of separately, maybe pre-programmed to show a need in combination with maybe the LNI. I think it can be a great diagnostic tool for leaders who maybe are on the fence and would like to see a little bit of data perhaps before they commit to a larger engagement. Also, I think you can use the DNI in a workshop format. We're actually providing evaluation of a group of people and doing a workshop and really explaining the DNI and doing goal setting. Again, maybe as a prelude to a larger program. I think it'd be useful for that. And also one-on-one coaching, maybe in combination with an LMI program. If you're doing that, this can be an excellent tool to help a leader begin to gain insights one-on-one for you to work through them. So just some of the ways you might be able to use the DNI. Next slide. So what is a 360 assessment? We throw this around. You'll hear me use the term multi-rater assessment. So a 360 or a multi-rater assessment is really just a way to look at multiple perspectives. So you get feedback from different people kind of surrounding a leader. That includes a self-report, they answer their own survey. It includes feedback from their employees or direct reports. It also includes feedback from peers or the people that are equal to them on the organizational chart. And lastly, manager or managers. Like I'm in the process right now of working with a team, and we're actually getting feedback from the board of directors for some of the senior leaders. So managers can actually be plural, where it's more senior people in the organization providing feedback. So you're getting feedback from these different relationships, and it provides you with good perspective on things like how well does your self perspective align with the way others see you? Do you treat direct reports differently than you may work with your peers? All those things come into play in a 360, but the report compiles all this feedback into one report from all these sources and gives your participants a really rich set of data to look at about themselves to understand. And as we said in the first couple of slides, it shows specific need areas. It helps them see where to focus their efforts. And the other thing is a 360 or multi-rater can evaluate a lot of different things. The DNI 360 evaluates leadership, and all those key behaviors that relate to good leadership. So that's what this DNI focuses on. Next. So the DNI, the way it's structured is this is a flexible tool where you can actually have some input into the selection of what we measure. So the way the DNI works, and I'll show you some more details here as we move on, there's actually 24 available scales within the DNI. When I say scales, those are areas like we see here, communication, empowerment. Each scale has questions related to it. Typically about 10 to 15 questions are specifically related to scoring one of these scales. So as you look at it, there's 9 scales on the left. I won't read them all, but you see those are core scales that are part of every DNI: communication, empowerment, trust building. So they're part of everyone. But then you have an option here on the right side where there's a set of 15 scales, we call them, that you can choose up to 6 of them for your program. And often these evolve from early discussions with leaders and the decision maker in the process as to what the organization's needs are, where some of their challenges are. And it gives you some flexibility to target into areas of need or interest. So you choose 6 of the 15 on the left. That gives you an overall 15 areas of measure or scales that you'll look at and the feedback that you get. Next slide. And I show you here, I want to share with you a little bit of what it looks like, both in terms of the survey that the participants get and the report. And here I'll touch on the survey and the report, and then I'll get a little into the behind the scenes, how it all works. But this is an example of a report screen that your people completing the survey, whether it be the participants in the program or other raters like direct reports, they get a survey that looks like this, and you can see there, there's some additional information at the top. I sort of just show you the survey part, so this is just a quick screenshot. But is a highly effective communicator, and they click on one of those buttons to rate them, and they'll go through a set of questions in various areas. Depending on which scales you've selected, those questions will vary. But each of the participants and their raters, typically anywhere, by the way, the raters anywhere from maybe 9 to as many as 15 raters are common. You could go a little less or a little more than that, depending, but we'll fill this out and answer questions either about the participant, or they'll answer questions about themselves to give some perspective. Next slide. Here is a screenshot of the report itself. So within the DNi, we go through kind of various perspectives on the results that we include in the report. This shows you what we call the scale definition. So on this, each of those 15 scales that we've measured, you get a graph like this one here, and I'll talk about it a little bit. So this is the description of the scale. We describe it for the participants so they can see what it means, what we're measuring. As I said, this is the average of 10 to 15 questions that relate to this communication scale. And here we see a response from the individual, the managers, their peers, and direct reports, and the scores here. So what you're looking at is there's kind of a low, mid, and high range there. That's what the blue bar represents. It kind of breaks it up. And you'll see in communication that the individual rated themselves as an 81 out of 100 on communication. So they think pretty highly of themselves as a communicator. But their manager doesn't think so highly of them. They scored them at a 46 out of 100. So there's a gap there of 35 points that shows you the difference on the right. Then the peers rated them as a 60 out of 100. So those are their coworkers who pretty much are at the same level as them. And then you see the direct reports here. So you have a report showing the breakdown of how they saw themselves, and then how this feedback in these areas, these relationship areas, saw the individual. So what do we have here? So we have the self saw themselves pretty high at 81, but the manager at 46. So that 35-point gap, that's a pretty large gap. So that may be something to think about and to talk to them about. Why does the manager see them as perhaps not being as good of a communicator? Peers are a little higher, and direct reports are even higher, but still pretty large gap. So as you look at this individual, you may say, hey, there might be an opportunity here to improve communication and to talk to them perhaps about setting a goal in this area to work on it because of this feedback and some of the gaps we see. You might even talk to them about issues with their manager. Maybe they're not communicating as well with that manager as they could, or maybe a group of people at that level who they're working with. And sometimes that's related to a power relationship. You know, we communicate differently with people who have power over us versus people we have power over. So this is an example of sort of step one in talking to them about their results. Looking at this, make sure they understand the communication area, and then start to talk about the score and the differences in the various levels. Next. The other area we look at in the DNi, there's something called ratios. So this is just a little different presentation of what you saw earlier. You see the communication there on the left, that this is the same, the self score. And then we see here managers, peers, and direct reports are actually averaged together. So what you're looking at there is the average of all their feedback is a 57 for communication over there under ratio. And then 81 was their own score. So you can begin to look at what's the overall gap between how others see them on average and how they see themselves. And that's an example of a pretty large gap. So there could be a communication problem here that probably would benefit from some attention, goal setting, and discussion with you as a facilitator. So each of the areas are presented. This is just one screenshot. And that at the top is an example with a description of what it is. And this is a screenshot right out of the report itself. Go ahead, Sam, next. So in the report, there's also something called scale rankings. So what we do here is we actually take the 15 scales and we order them from highest to lowest scores on average. So you'll see there on the far left is self, and there's kind of two screenshots here. I showed you the top of the list and the bottom of the list. So where you see that 13 disciplinary action, that's sort of the bottom of the list offset. And so as you're looking at it, you see the self scores, the 84 all the way down, then I stop at the seventh item, and I jump over to disciplinary action, motivation level, and leadership. So what you're looking at here is what are they ranked the best at the top, and where did they rank themselves the lowest? What's interesting about this is then you see that aligned with the average scores from managers, peers, and direct reports, kind of lined up. And often what I do here is I'll look at maybe the top 3 and come across here and say, is there any commonality with what they see themselves versus how others see them? Or is there a commonality in things like you see goal directedness there? You see managers, goal directedness was the highest score they got. And then if you go over to peers and you go down to number 3, you'll see goal directedness is there at a 65 in that third column. And if you go to the end, you see the direct reports list. Goal directedness is also number 3. So it looks like goal directedness is a strength that others are seeing in this individual that they're not seeing in themselves. So that could be an item for discussion. And then as you jump down to the bottom here, you'll see the individual ranked himself lowest in leadership. You see that 15 leadership and a 48 score in the lower left of the screen. That means that individual probably sees himself and his leadership ability low or poor out of these 15 areas we looked at. So then I might say, okay, how do their managers see them? You see leadership is actually ranked at 13th on the list of 15. In the next column, leadership is ranked at 48. It's third to last. And then we go across and we see second to last under peers is leadership with a score of 52. And then we see down at the end, direct reports, they rate them as a 61 in leadership. And direct reports, their employees see leadership as their sort of worst attribute of these 15. So that could be a big deal. So you have an individual in a leadership role and they rank themselves as last in leadership, and others don't see them as particularly good in that area either. So that, again, is an area you could dig into, look at, think about, do some goal setting around what's going on there. How could they focus on that? And if you're doing this as a lead into a program, this is great information around goal setting, the win-win agreement and discussion, even looking at the win-win versus this, maybe their initial draft, to say, do they line up? Do they recognize this? Or maybe they don't recognize it. But now you have some hard data from different perspectives that shows you that, yes, there looks like there's a challenge here for this individual. Okay. Sam, next. So on the DNI then, we've talked about scales, and there are questions on the survey they answer. They go through and answer, and those are combined together, 10 or 15 questions per scale. What we do in this question rankings section of the report is we actually dive into the questions themselves. So now we can look to see, maybe at a little lower level than the broad scales, what might be going on in terms of scoring. So what we have here in the question rankings is we actually take all of the feedback from the 3 other groups. In other words, we don't include the self scores, we only include their feedback, and then we average that together. So again, on average here, we see motivates direct reports to continually upgrade their skills and job knowledge. That's the top question there. in the middle of the page if you found that, and it has an average score of 100. So everyone who gave feedback rated them as top in this area. So that's obviously a strength for this individual, and we can work our way down through those questions that are ranked at 100 or very high at 92 and get an idea of which sort of questions were presented to people giving feedback that they saw as this individual does pretty good at. Let's see the other side of that. Sam, next slide. So now I'm jumping down a couple of pages because there are a lot of questions, but now at the top of the slide there, you'll see ranked at 25 on average, attempts to place employees in work that is interesting and rewarding in itself. So on those other scores, they got 100. This, they get a 25 on average, meaning this is a question that was scoring pretty low from everyone giving this individual feedback. You might want to think about that, might want to drive goal setting around that, talk to the individual, see what they think about that. Same with the 33s there, those two 33s, communicates a vision that inspires and motivates. We talked about communication maybe being a problem. Now we're seeing maybe it's communication around the vision. Do people understand where the company's going, what its vision is? Are they doing a good job? It looks like this individual is not. So maybe helping them figure out how do we communicate more simply and clearly the vision for the company, and helping them do a better job at that would be, looks like some great things to work on. So that's the scores around questions themselves, and I hope you begin to see there's a lot of good data here we can use. Go ahead, Sam, next slide. The other thing we've added to the DNI, which is new, and this is thanks actually for feedback from our friends up at LMI in Canada, who encouraged us to put some open-ended questions in. So what we wanted to do is not add too many questions, but let's add a couple of open-ended so people can add their subjective thoughts to the feedback. So what we see there, the first question is, what are a few changes that this leader could make to become more effective? And the second question you'll see about mid-page there, what do you feel are the most important strengths of this leader? This is an individual who I'm working with right now. He's an executive on a team. And this is some of the feedback that individual provided, and I'm just sharing it here. So you can see some real feedback. So you see there more informal interaction, need for more meetings, just a bit more how is it going. This is a very driven individual who will soon be CEO of the company. And sometimes he's just too much in his office, too much driven towards objectives and measures, and not enough just getting out to get to know people. And that was some feedback that he got on this. So you get some nice open-ended comments that provide a little bit more of the why behind the results that you're seeing, and this can be very effective as well. So it's important to take this picture in entirety from the report, and I hope you see here, you get a lot of good information about the individual. You're getting it from multiple perspectives in the organization. So for you as a facilitator, you're beginning to see what's going on in the organization with the people you're working with. You're beginning to understand maybe the culture of that organization. That guides you as a facilitator to be able to target your efforts probably more accurately. It also gives you specific things at early stages to talk with participants about, help drive that win-win agreement development. And it also, as you begin to review results with the decision makers, or even prior to getting into say a program, gives you the ability to share with them specific feedback showing a need and showing specific need areas. Sam, next slide. So another component of the DNI is kind of a workbook area, an exercise that's included. And this is what you might encourage the individual to review their results and come up with what they believe are their greatest strengths that they can leverage. You know, the strength finder approach. Let's pull in and see what people are strongest at, and the feedback shows that. And then lastly, what are some need areas that the individual may have? And this is where you want to encourage them to take this feedback in its entirety, not try to pick and choose in the feedback or identify who said what, but look at it generally and use this as a constructive exercise to help them maybe understand themselves a little better. As you work through this, keep in mind the DNI should not be a performance evaluation tool. I don't think it's appropriate for that. This shouldn't be used to drive promotions, decision-making, raises around those areas, or selection of people. I think if it's done right and it's presented well, it's a constructive developmental tool, and you encourage everyone involved to use it that way, especially the participants who will need to maybe communicate out to others that they're participating in this program. They're using this feedback to try to improve and encourage others to be open and honest with them. So this exercise allows them to work through that and maybe put some thoughts in writing as they work on it, maybe separate from a conference with you, and then maybe drive that into their planning, their win-win agreement, or goal setting during the program. It can be important for that. Next slide. And you'll see here I just made a few comments about, I've talked about this, but it provides you with that data, insight into what's going on, helps participants. So important, is we talk about change processes, that the first step in any good change process, at least according to Kurt Lewin, is that unfreezing step, that awareness step, that ability to see a need and recognize this is something I should work on. And often objective feedback or feedback like this can help to see that. And then obviously the decision maker, this can play a role both in terms of the initial start of the process to use, but also this can be used as a post process. So maybe you come back in 6 months later and say, hey, let's do this again. Let's use this as an ongoing tool to measure progress and measure the stickiness of the work we've done. So let's see that we've maintained that progress and those improvements. And we can do that with a follow-up survey. So it could be an annual or semi-annual process. That's another way to use this tool, and it can be very, very useful in that. Sam, next slide. So the DNI in a program. So I try to outline a little bit. I know some of us follow the LMI process very carefully. Some have our own mix to that, but I wanted to walk through how you might tie this into a program. So most of us will go in, sell a program, and then go through, what I might do is look at overall objectives. What do we want to achieve in this ELD program with this group of leaders? So this is what we want to achieve broadly. Here are some of the organizational focus areas. Here are some of the organizational challenges, perhaps. So we sell the program, we set objectives, and then we say, okay, we're going to meet with participants. We're going to go through the win-win process. And that's a good opportunity to introduce the DNI into your process and include it with those discussions with participants and work through with them, because they have to, one, understand it, and I think buy into the use of it. So you want to make sure they're comfortable with it. And then beyond that, help them to choose raters. Some will do this different. I'm a believer that the selection of rater feedback, their partners who will work with them, should be collaborative with the approval of senior leaders, with the approval of their mentor or their manager in the program. And I think that should happen here as part of this. So they need to pick those partners, work with you in that, and you help them understand how to select good partners, people who've worked with them for a little bit, people who can provide good feedback. The next step then would be is usually before that first session with them in the program, we send out the DNI. It's done online. It's very easy to do. You can send it out to the participants and the raters, asking them to complete this feedback. You can include introductory information, those emails that go out that help them understand what it's about. And that can be done in a way that even a preliminary email goes out maybe from the senior leader to all of the raters who will be participating, helping them understand the importance of the program and the importance of this feedback. And then they get an individual note essentially from you, giving them instructions how to complete the survey. From there, you can monitor progress, and our system allows you to see who's completed their surveys, who hasn't, send out reminders, that type of thing. You can manage all that behind the scenes pretty easily. After the surveys are completed, then you can generate reports in PDF form that could either be emailed out to the participants or it can be downloaded and printed, or both, to review with the participants. And then from there, it could be a process to review that feedback with them, to sit down and talk about it, to encourage them to set goals based on that feedback, perhaps influencing or driving the creation of the win-win, which may have already been developed, and maybe you tweak it by this, or maybe you hold off until you get these results to create the win-win. I think there could be a little bit of flexibility there. And then from that, you can monitor during the program what was agreed to and the feedback that you saw. And as I said, it can help you learn more about your individual participants in a deeper way than you could just through initial interviews, and include that. And then finally, as you do the mid-process and post-process reviews, incorporating this in. For instance, we as I said from the example, we identified a communication challenge. We set goals to improve on that around communication of the vision more clearly and succinctly to all the employees. And here's the progress that was made on it. So you can connect the feedback, areas identified, to actual goals, and then goal progress during the process back to those decision makers in those reviews. So I think a very powerful use. So I hope this is an example, and you certainly can tweak this to support your own approach. Sam, next. So let's talk about, I want to kind of lift the curtain and show you a little bit about. So this all runs on the cloud, and let me share a little bit how it works behind the scenes. And I mentioned you can monitor things. Let me show you that. So here is a snapshot of a DNi screen on the partner or licensee website. Typically, I call it the partner website, but it's a secure website that only you can access, or you and your support people can access to get into any of your DNIs that are underway. And this is an example of one. This is called a batch. A batch is basically one program where you have a group of people completing this. And you can see that we're looking at assessment results at the top. Yakov is the participant. And you'll see Yakov there completed his survey on August 6th, 2018. And for his raters, 3 of 3 raters have completed their feedback. Normally, they have quite a few more raters. This was a test we were running just so I could produce this nice screen. And then down below, you see the rater assessment. So at the bottom of the screen, at the top, we see our participants. At the bottom, we see all of the raters who are providing feedback, and we can monitor them to see if they've completed their assessment. You see completed date. If they haven't completed, it'll show that. And you can also see there that you can check off people who haven't completed and resend an email invitation, a reminder to them. So this allows you to manage, and you don't see it over on the right, but there's an ability to download the report for Yakov really at any point in time. So if Yakov has completed his survey and only a few raters have responded and curiosity is killing you, you can jump in and download that report and see what it looks like very easily on your own, and just get a preliminary idea of what's happening. And then from there, manage and monitor. So this is a back-end screen that allows you to manage each, and basically the way this works is we have something called a batch, which is a group of DNIs together, typically a program. So let's say you've got 3 clients. Each client is running an ELD with maybe 10 participants in it. So you have 30 participants. Those participants would each be in their own batch. So you'd have client A in a batch with 10 participants and everything going on there. You'd have client B in a separate batch. And what you're looking at on this slide here is a view of the batch. You'd have a separate batch for client B and another batch for client C, and you could move easily between them to see the status, to download reports, also download data. The beauty of this is the back-end system here gives you the ability to see current client activity as well as go back historically to previous clients and monitor things. The other beauty of this is for LMI, this gives us powerful data on how you're using these DNIs, and we can use that to look at overall usage, in fact, worldwide usage of the DNI, to improve and refine the tool to see how the results are coming out and actually produce summaries of that. We're not doing that right now, but we're just getting started with this. And all this data gives us a lot of information that can be very useful in the future to both promote the DNI, to give you information to share with your clients, and also to improve the tool. Next slide. Sam, did you? There we go. Okay. So you've heard me talk about some terminology. Maybe, I'm not sure this is the, should have heard this sooner, but some of the things we talk about an assessment. And an assessment is any assessment. The DNi is an assessment of participants in a program with feedback. The idea of a batch I mentioned. A batch is a purchased group of tokens that you have, typically around a program with a client. You have the ability to create custom welcome messages for batches and to name them in a way that's appropriate for that client. So you can call them whatever you want. But when I say partner, I mean licensees and partners and that secure website that you have access to. And I mentioned this here on the call, I think, but you have Ray-T and Ray-Tur. We used to have, I think, participants or leaders and observers. This is a little bit more general phraseology that applies, for instance, both with the telemetrics assessments that are online here, as well as the DNi, and we kind of have generalized that a little bit because we have many assessments available. So that's some of the terms. Next. And then why online? Some of this you may be thinking about, but obviously the DNi was online before, but I think you have ease of delivery. It's very easy to deliver this. It's easy to manage what's going on. It's easy to monitor it over time and go back to historical data. I think the DNi, people like to get individualized feedback. They really do. Sometimes it's not always what they want to see, but this is an exciting part that I think adds some energy to processes that you're doing. They can complete the assessments however they want. Laptop, tablet, phone can all work, and they can do it that way. I mentioned the archive for data. We can improve it over time. We can report on individuals, groups, and companies, and even whole countries. And the other point is we can do multilingual versions, which we're doing now. We're actually working with the LMI GCC to do an Arabic version. We're looking at Spanish, French, and German following, and maybe even Japanese is in there too. So the multi-language versions are coming actually fairly soon. The Arabic version, I think, is a matter of weeks away. And Spanish and French, once we get the conversion process down, those multi-language versions will come pretty quickly as we go through. There's really no technical reason we can't do it. It's mainly how we're interacting with the partners who are helping, how we're communicating things back and forth, and how we organize a lot of translation data. Like the Arabic is right to left, and it's multi-byte characters and a lot more complicated. So we're working out those logistics, but generally we already support the multiple languages. Next slide. So our team, some of you have been involved in telemetrics, you know some of this, but I have a separate company. Factor Factory is a separate corporation. It's formed just to support the assessment publishing and the things we're doing around Teleo and the DNi. We have experts in psychology, software development, and the related technology to ensure that we have a safe, modern platform, and we have appropriate validated tools to use out there that are useful and defensible with your clients. We have 4 people dedicated to this process. We're doing continuous development, typically release every few weeks. We've been on a cycle, maybe it's summertime, about once a month. We've been releasing updates to the overall platform. And obviously we have the DNi. We also have the entire suite of telemetrics, just to plug that, are available as well on this platform. And that gives you a nice common platform if you're using both, where they're all stored in one place. And we're here to help you make this work. We're LMI partners for a long time. We understand LMI and the tools and the programs you're using, and we use them as well. So we're here to make it work and figure out how to plug it all together and make it useful. Next slide. The other side is we're hosted on Google's cloud services, which is a very robust, scalable platform. We have worldwide coverage and redundancy, military-grade security, full backups. Your data is secure and protected by some of the best technology in the world. You'll see there some of the security standards that we follow, including the EU directive and GDPR. So our European friends are safe and ready to go with this platform. And lastly, it's environmentally friendly. Google does a lot to be carbon neutral with their technology, so that's an important part of it too. Next slide. Any thoughts, questions? I think I left a little time here. We've got 10 more minutes.
Oh yeah, we can do that.
Yep.
I have one here from Jeff Johnson, and I'm going to unmute Jeff. Jeff, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Let's see. I wrote it down there for you, Sam. Actually, can you expand it? You could ask it for me if you want. Well, is this report, is the report branded with LMI? Is it report branded with factory, or can we brand it with our own company name?
Yeah, it's branded as LMI. It's basically branded as LMI right now. I guess, Jeff, my thought on that, and Sam, if I don't put my foot in my mouth, is if your volumes were sufficient, we have the capacity on our end to talk about private labeling or creating a report that would allow you to do some custom branding. There would be a cost to that, and you'd probably want to have some volume to justify it. But certainly, I think we could talk about that if you're serious about it.
Okay, and a related question, Kent, is on the ONI and DNI, are there brand names for that? Or these LMI products? I was wondering, were they originally produced by a third party? Because like on LinkedIn, sometimes they want to know what the product name is. And is DNI and ONI, are those basically well-known brands?
Well, I don't know about brands. They were both created by LMI. Now, the underlying psychology beneath the DNI, for instance, is sound and based on science, but the tool itself, the underlying questions and their relationship to the factors, is something that was built by LMI, and it was Sam, help me out here.
Cliff Williams.
Cliff Williams, thank you. But Cliff Williams designed the DNI, and we followed that model. So,
thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to unmute Dr. Al. I see your hands up.
Uh-oh.
Yes, sir. Oh, geez, Kent, I just want you to catch your breath for a minute or two. As usual, you did a wonderful job of a lot of information. And I don't want to repeat any of it, but I want to take the issue at the front end, which is the front end of selling it, or selling any of these. You have people. I'll start with the idea of horsepower. The fact is that the DNI, the ONI, and other LMI tools have a great deal of power in them. And think of it as horsepower in a vehicle. When you're selling to a person who wants to use a tool for hiring, they already think they know what the tool's supposed to do for them. And what they usually think they know is they know they don't want to hire any more liars, losers, or louses. That's the best way to remember the things they're trying to avoid. And you don't have to convince them on the return of investment. In the DNI and the ONI, it is not as clear what's in it for them. So I would suggest that when you are working with the DNI, you need to be very clear as to the WIFM. What's the return for them? Why should they do this? It is hard to understand that. It's hard to sell it. But if you sell it and get it going, like the DNI can get it going, you will have a repeat customer for a number of things. And I say that from experience. I think that's enough now.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Al. Very kind.
Whoops, I was muted. Okay, now we have Vince Fazio. Vince, you're unmuted.
I have about 5 questions. said 9 to 15 raters for each ratee.
Yes.
Rater. Okay. Does the pricing change depending upon the number of raters or cost changes? And then that's the other question about cost pricing.
Right. The pricing is for the DNI plus raters. I think we've capped the raters. In fact, we upgraded this a little bit for one of our partners, but right now I believe you can handle up to 25 raters with no impact on price. So the idea here is you get one report, and I highly recommend you have at least 9 feedback partners. There's actually some support for that in science, up through a number maybe like 15. And like I said, some people have really gone high up into the 20 range. I don't necessarily see a problem with that, but it might be a tad excessive. So that's kind of the range, and there's no impact on price. And I'll defer to Sam for any comments on actual pricing.
Okay, well, I'm not going to be giving price. You want price, you send me an email and we'll deal with the price. The other issue that I do want to bring up is the cost is twofold. One, there's the cost of the assessment, and two, there's the cost of time. If you have 25 top executives who are going to be answering this, and Kent, how long would you say it takes to go through 15 different factors?
Yeah, I think the number that we've been seeing is right around 30 minutes. Sort of 25 to about 35 minutes seems to be the range we're seeing to complete a survey.
Okay, so if a executive has 8 reports, you're talking about what, 4 hours?
Well, hang on. Yeah. So if they have 8 reports providing them feedback, in total, there's 4 hours of effort there. Not for the executive, but 4 hours of time for all of his reports to complete these surveys.
No, so that would be for each person.
Well, no, each person will invest about 30 minutes. So if you're a leader and you're in a program with us and you have 8 subordinates who report to you, each one of those will take 30 minutes to complete a survey for you as a program participant. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that sounds right. I just thought I'd bring that up. Okay, Vince, continue.
Well, that answers one of my questions. How long does it take to complete it as well?
Yeah.
In the gap analysis, what's considered a significant gap?
Yeah, it's interesting, Vince. We've seen some things like around telemetrics. We look for 10-point gaps.
Okay.
And somewhat arbitrarily call them significant. It was interesting. I just yesterday reviewed some results with 2 executives, and as you look at that, basically the one executive had gaps that were tighter. They tended to be in like an 8 to 12 point range, but then the other executive had gaps that were in like the 20 to 35 range. So as we look at the gaps and what's significant, sometimes it's leader specific, meaning as I'm walking through with the gaps that occur, I'm looking at the very highest gaps and the very lowest gaps. And you may reach a point where it's insignificant, but generally you'll see a gap range that's occurring on a report, in my experience, and you will use that as a reference point. So it kind of varies based on the individual. However, you may also want to, for instance, summarize in the early stages of a program the results generally of the DNI and be able to summarize some things, and that might be an area to look at. I don't mean to dance around that, but I think it's specific to the individual you're reviewing and the results that they get, what is significant.
And I was wondering, do you ever have raters who are outside the company, like the board of directors or maybe shareholders or customers?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We do, and that's typically you can include them in that manager group. But yeah, that's not uncommon at all, and I think it's good practice to include it. sometimes you need to keep that in mind. I know in my own experience, you have board of directors that'll come in and say, it's really hard to answer some of these questions because of my limited day-to-day experience with the individual. And all you tell them is your responses will be grouped with others who are like you in this process. So we understand that in certain scale, certain results, you may be a little out of the norm, and we'll take that into account. And most of those people, like I just talked to like a partner in an accounting firm who did this, and I gave him that feedback, and I said, you're not individually identified, but you're grouped with others who are like you. So do your best, don't worry about it. And it worked out. He was fine with that. He said, that's great. Thank you so much. All right. Thanks, Vince. Go Penn State.
Okay, that looks like all the questions that we had today.
Okay, great.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, oops, wrong screen, is thank you for attending today's session. I will be doing some modifications to this recording and then putting it up on YouTube and sending everybody a link so they can go back and review it. And I want to particularly say thank you to Kent Frese. Did a good job once we got started. So,
yes, yeah, and thank you everybody for your patience with our technical issues. My apologies.
all right.
All right. Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.